David Anderson was rejected on a blind date during Christmas at his mansion until the small daughter of the housekeeper asked, "Can I be your daughter?" Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The typical December rain in New York City tapped against the bulletproof glass windows of the penthouse in Manhattan, creating a hypnotic rhythm that echoed through the exquisite environment. David adjusted the knot of his Italian tie for the 5th time, checked his Patek Philippe watch again, and sighed deeply. At 45, he commanded a tech empire that moved billions of dollars annually. His artificial intelligence startups were a global reference, but at that moment, he felt like an insecure teenager waiting for his first date. "Relax, David. She's perfect for you," his younger sister Marina had said 3 days earlier while showing him photos of the woman, Fernanda, on her phone. "Executive MBA in New York, speaks 4 languages. You two are a match." David looked at his own reflection in the living room mirror, tall with graying hair at the temples, broad shoulders that still revealed years of swimming in his youth. He wore a tailored navy blazer that cost more than a compact car. On the outside, the image of absolute success. On the inside, an emptiness that not even all the money in the world could fill. The 3-bedroom apartment was an extension of his personality, minimalist, organized with military precision, every object in its exact place. European designer furniture, contemporary art on the walls, cutting-edge technology integrated into every room. Everything impeccable, everything cold, everything lonely. From the open kitchen came the comforting aroma of roast pork, mixed with the sweet perfume of dried apricots and hazelnuts that Maria, his housekeeper, was preparing for the special stuffing. It was tradition. Every Christmas, she insisted on preparing the full feast, even knowing that David rarely had guests to share the table. "Mr. David, can I take a look at the table before the lady arrives?" Maria's soft voice broke the silence. She appeared in the living room, drying her hands on the floral apron that contrasted with the sophistication of the environment. Maria Johnson was 35 years old, but carried the weight of responsibilities that made her seem older. A widow for 2 years, she was raising her 7-year-old daughter alone while working as a housekeeper during the day and a freelance editor during the nights. A graduate in literature from NYU, she had abandoned her dream of teaching when her husband died in a work accident, leaving debts that she still paid religiously. "Of course, Maria. Thank you for preparing all this, even on Christmas Eve." David watched her as she arranged the silverware and checked that the crystal glasses were spotless. "No problem, Mr. David. We agreed that Christmas here is special. Besides, you will love the feast." Maria smiled with genuine affection. During the 6 years working for him, she had learned to decipher the nuances of his mood. She knew when he was stressed about mergers and acquisitions, when sleepless nights resulted in morning irritability, and she also knew that behind the relentless business facade was a deeply lonely man. The intercom buzzed at exactly 8 o'clock. Fernanda had arrived on time, as expected from a successful executive. David activated the video system and saw an elegant woman in the lobby. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a white blazer, high heels, and the confident posture of someone used to leading important meetings. "Good evening, David." Fernanda greeted him with a firm handshake and a professional smile. "Marina talked so much about you that I feel like we already know each other." During dinner, the conversation flowed over predictable topics. Fernanda was truly impressive. She spoke about blockchain investments with the same ease she discussed trends in the European market. She had just returned from a stint in Singapore, where she managed the Asian expansion of a pharmaceutical multinational. "Your apartment is stunning," she commented, admiring the night view of Manhattan through the panoramic windows. "It must be amazing to wake up to this view every day." "It's functional," David replied, noticing the coldness in his own voice. It's close to the office, has good infrastructure. Maria appeared discreetly to serve the second course, and David noticed how Fernanda barely acknowledged her presence, treating her as an invisible part of the decor. Something about that bothered him deeply, although he couldn't quite understand why. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Fernanda was intelligent, articulate, and well-informed. They talked about cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, and travel itineraries for exotic destinations. She was exactly the type of woman he should admire. Ambitious, independent, of the same socio-economic level. But as the night progressed, David felt increasingly disconnected. It was like watching a well-rehearsed corporate presentation. Fernanda spoke about passions that sounded more like emotional investments, about experiences that seemed carefully curated to impress. "David, can I be direct?" Fernanda placed her wine glass on the table and looked at him with that executive gaze he knew well, the same one she used before closing unfavorable deals. "You are obviously successful, intelligent, and financially stable. All the qualities that, theoretically, a woman my age should value." "Theoretically?" David repeated, sensing what was coming next. "But there's something missing here. You talk about work, like you're reciting computer code. You show zero vulnerability, zero genuine passion for anything that isn't an algorithm or a financial spreadsheet." Fernanda stood up, grabbing her Italian handbag. "I'm sorry, but I need someone with more soul and less mathematical formula." The words echoed through the silent apartment after she left. David stood frozen in front of the Christmas tree, a decoration hired from a specialized company, perfectly symmetrical, with LED lights blinking in a programmed sequence. The lights seemed to mock him, reminding him that even his Christmas celebration was outsourced, lacking real human warmth. It was then that he heard small barefoot steps in the hallway. A little girl appeared at the living room door, wearing a pink unicorn-patterned pajama, her slightly messy, colorful braids from sleep, approached. She was Maria's daughter, with her bright brown eyes and a smile that could light up any room. "Uncle David," the hesitant little voice broke the silence. "Sorry to bother you, but I heard the door closing and got worried." David watched her slowly come closer, carrying a faded, stuffed animal. There was something in the sincerity of that childlike gaze that unraveled all his carefully constructed defenses. "Why do you look so sad on Christmas?" Emily asked, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. "Mommy said Christmas is for being happy, even when you're alone. Do you want to play with me and be my family for today?" The question hit David like a punch in the stomach. For a moment he was speechless, watching that child who, with the typical innocence of her age, had verbalized exactly what he most desired and feared: to belong to someone, to be part of something bigger than spreadsheets and reports. Maria rushed in, panic on her face. "Emily, what are you doing, girl? Apologize to Uncle David right now." She held her daughter by the shoulders, clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Uncle David. She woke up and left the room before I noticed. Come on, Emily, let's leave Uncle in peace." But David, surprising himself, raised his hand to interrupt. "No," he said, with a softness he hadn't used in years. "You don't have to go." And then, for the first time in decades, he did something completely spontaneous, without calculating consequences or analyzing cost-benefit. "Do you want to stay for dinner, both of you?" January arrived in New York with its characteristic warmth, and the city's routine was returning to normal after the festivities. For David, however, nothing felt normal since that Christmas night. The improvised dinner with Maria and Emily had lasted until almost midnight, filled with conversations he never imagined having, about favorite cartoons, family recipes, and childhood stories he himself had forgotten to tell. "Uncle David, do you want me to make stronger coffee today?" Maria asked on the first Monday of the year, noticing his tired eyes as she organized the morning newspapers on the balcony table. David was different. For the past 6 years, she had known him as a man of inflexible routines, waking up at 5:30, drinking black coffee without sugar while reading financial reports, leaving at 7 sharp for the office and rarely returning before 10 at night. Now, it was 8 in the morning, and he was still at home in shorts and a t-shirt, working on his laptop while drinking coffee with milk. "No, thank you. By the way, Maria," David hesitated, closing the laptop. "How was Emily's first day of school?" The question caught Maria by surprise. In 6 years of working together, he had never asked about her personal life beyond basic courtesies. It was good. She was a bit nervous about the new teacher, but she soon got along with her classmates. Maria studied his expression, trying to understand the sudden interest. "Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," David murmured, but there was something more in his eyes. "Does she like school?" "Yes, she does, especially science. She keeps asking questions about animals, plants." Maria smiled, relaxing a bit. "Last week, she filled her notebook with drawings of sea turtles. She wants to be a marine biologist when she grows up." David nodded thoughtfully, as if he were filing that information away in some important part of his mind. The domestic routine had subtly changed. David began to work more from home, setting up his temporary office on the gourmet balcony. Officially, he claimed he was closely supervising the development of a new augmented reality app. In practice, Maria noticed he was making excuses to be present when she arrived with Emily from school around 4 in the afternoon. "Uncle David!" Emily would cheerfully shout every time she saw him, running to show him her activities from the day. "Look what I learned about dolphins." And David, to Maria's surprise, kept everything, every colorful drawing, every wild scientific discovery from a 7-year-old. He even bought a special folder to organize Emily's research. "You don't have to do this," Maria said one afternoon, watching him help her daughter with a project about marine ecosystems. "I know you must have more important things to deal with." "I don't," David replied, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Besides, she asks me questions that even my engineers don't ask. Yesterday, she wanted to know if it was possible to create robots that clean the ocean." I ended up researching the topic all night. Maria watched the two of them bent over a world map, David patiently explaining ocean currents, while Emily bombarded him with impossible questions. There was a tenderness in the way he listened to each question, treating the girl's wild theories with the same seriousness he dedicated to board meetings. The afternoons became routine. David discovered that Emily hated math. "Numbers are boring, Uncle David," loved adventure stories, and had a photographic memory for anything related to marine life. Maria, even tired from work, read to her daughter every night, a tradition she had kept religiously since becoming a widow. "Mommy reads the best stories in the world," Emily told David one afternoon while they drank orange juice on the balcony. "Yesterday she read about a mermaid who became a scientist. Did you know there are scientists who study real mermaids?" "Not exactly mermaids," David corrected with a smile, "but there are marine biologists who study aquatic mammals. Some even work with dolphins and whales." Emily's eyes lit up. "Just like Mommy. She also studied to be a teacher, but she works here because she needs to take care of me." The phrase echoed in David's mind for the rest of the day. Maria had vaguely mentioned that she had a degree in English, but he had never really processed what that meant. An intelligent, educated woman working as a janitor, not due to lack of qualifications, but out of financial necessity. That night, after Maria and Emily left, David found himself researching the job market for teachers in New York. The salaries were discouraging, especially for someone who needed to support a family alone. The first week of February brought an unexpected situation. Maria arrived at work visibly worried, constantly checking her phone. "Is something wrong?" David asked, noticing her agitation. "Well, next week is Mardi Gras, right? I always managed to leave Emily with a neighbor, but she traveled to Vermont, and the school will be closed." Maria sighed, running her hand through her hair. "I'm going to have to take a few days off or bring her with me if you don't mind." "Why not leave her here with me?" David suggested without thinking twice. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria looked at him as if he had suggested something completely absurd. "What do you mean?" "Well, I'll be working from home anyway. She can stay here while you sort out what you need to." David tried to sound casual, but he felt his heart race. "It's not a big deal." "Mr. David, with all due respect, you don't have experience with kids, and I can't just leave my daughter like that." "Maria," David gently interrupted, "do you trust me?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria studied his face, the expression lines that deepened when he smiled at Emily, the way his eyes lit up when the girl came home from school, the infinite patience he showed with endless questions about marine life. "I trust you," she finally admitted, "but Emily can be a lot of work. Leave it to me." Mardi Gras Tuesday dawned cloudy, and David woke up with butterflies in his stomach. He had prepared the apartment as if he were hosting an important client. He bought art supplies, downloaded documentaries about oceans, and even hid chocolates around the house to create a treasure hunt. When Maria arrived with Emily at 7 in the morning, David was as nervous as he had ever been for any corporate presentation. "Remember the rules," Maria whispered to her daughter. "Listen to Uncle David. Don't touch anything he doesn't allow and behave yourself." "Mom, relax. Uncle David is cool. We're going to have so much fun." Emily was already exploring the living room, fascinated by the possibilities of the day. "If anything happens, anything at all, just call me," Maria said to David, handing him a detailed list with instructions about meals, schedules, and emergency numbers. "Everything will be fine," David assured, but inside he was as anxious as she was. The day began with breakfast on the balcony, where David discovered that Emily loved to invent crazy stories about the clouds passing by. One cloud turned into a flying whale, another transformed into an ice castle where astronaut penguins lived. "Uncle David, do you have imagination?" Emily asked, serious as if it were a crucial scientific question. "I don't think so, not much," David admitted. "Then I'll teach you. Everyone has imagination. You just need to practice." And thus began one of the most transformative experiences of David Anderson's life. They built an entire city with cardboard boxes in the living room, where Emily was the mayor and David, the engineer responsible for solving imaginary urban problems. They had a picnic on the terrace, watching airplanes and inventing fantastic destinations for each one. Emily taught David how to make bead bracelets, and in return, he showed her how the home automation system worked. "Why do you live alone, Uncle David?" The question came during lunch out of the blue. "Well, I work a lot. There's not much time for other things." "But everyone needs family. Even dolphins live in groups." Emily chewed thoughtfully. "You could be part of our family. We could adopt you." David nearly choked on his water. "That's not really how it works." "Why not? Family isn't just who you're born with. It's who takes care of us and wants what's best for us. You take care of us." When Maria returned in the late afternoon, she found the two of them on the living room floor, surrounded by colorful papers and laughing at something Emily had drawn, apparently an octopus in a suit and tie leading a meeting underwater. "How was it?" she asked, noticing David's relaxed face and her daughter's radiant smile. "It was the best day of my life," Emily shouted, running to hug her mother. "Uncle David knows how to do origami, and he said he'll teach me how to make robots." Maria looked at David, who was getting up from the floor with a different smile, lighter, more genuine than any expression she had ever seen on him. "Thank you," she simply said, but there was depth in that word. "Thank you," David replied, and they both understood that something fundamental had changed between them that day. As they prepared to leave, David felt a strange pang in his chest, something between joy and fear that he couldn't name. For the first time in years, the silent apartment didn't feel like a refuge. It felt empty. March arrived, with its long afternoons and the typical muggy warmth of New York's autumn. David had partially resumed his routine at the office, but he found that his mind was always divided between financial spreadsheets and echoes of childlike laughter resonating through the hallways of his home. The change did not go unnoticed by his closest colleagues. "You're different, Dave," commented Marcus Taylor, his partner and best friend since college, during a lunch at the Plaza Hotel. "Less robotic. You even smiled at the secretary this morning." David absent-mindedly stirred his salad, wondering if he should tell Marcus about Maria and Emily. Marcus was discreet, but he was also part of the social circle that included his sister Marina, and he wasn't ready for that kind of exposure. "I'm just re-evaluating priorities," he replied diplomatically. "New woman?" Marcus insisted with a mischievous smile. "Marina mentioned that the meeting with the executive was a disaster." "Something like that," David deflected, but inside he knew the answer was infinitely more complex. Back at the apartment that afternoon, he found Maria was organizing the library, a task she had casually mentioned weeks before. She was standing on a ladder, reorganizing volumes in alphabetical order when David noticed something that made him stop at the door. "Maria?" "Hi, David. I got here early today because Emily stayed for extra tutoring." She descended from the ladder, holding a worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude. "Wow, I haven't seen this book in years. It's one of my favorite works." David observed how her eyes lit up as she spoke about the novel. "Have you read Garcia Marquez?" "In college, yes. I even wrote a paper on magical realism for my thesis." Maria lovingly caressed the book's cover before placing it on the shelf. "It was one of the most incredible experiences of my academic life." "And do you miss that? The academic life?" The question caught Maria off guard. She stopped organizing the books and looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and melancholy. "Every day," she admitted with an honesty that surprised them both. "But life sometimes has other plans for us." David wanted to ask more, but the sound of keys in the lock announced Emily's arrival, who rushed in like a whirlwind of energy. "Uncle David! Uncle David! Guess what?" She threw her backpack on the floor and ran to him, bouncing with excitement. "The teacher said I can participate in the school science fair." "Really? And what will your project be?" "I'm going to study how dolphins communicate. I want to prove they have a language like ours." Emily's eyes sparkled with scientific enthusiasm. "Can you help me? I need a computer to research." David looked at Maria, who was watching her daughter with a mix of pride and concern. "Of course I can. But first, let's talk to your mum about it." That night, after Emily went to bed, Maria and David talked in the kitchen while she prepared dinner for the next day. It was a strangely domestic scene that left David feeling both comfortable and nervous. "She's obsessed with this project," Maria commented, seasoning the chicken. "Last night she stayed up late drawing dolphins and coming up with wild theories." "She's a brilliant kid," David said, watching her work. There was a grace in her movements, an economy of gestures that revealed years of practice in doing more with less. "You must be proud." "I am, but I'm also worried." Maria paused, her hands still on the cutting board. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm limiting her potential. A private school with more resources, specialized teachers, and why not change schools?" Maria laughed without humor. Because I live in the real world, David. Private school costs what I earn in 3 months. And even if I got a scholarship, there's materials, uniforms, transportation. It's a whole different universe. David wanted to say he could help, that money was not a problem for him, but something in Maria's tone made him hesitate. There was wounded pride in those words, a dignity he respected too much to trample on. The following week brought a different routine. David began, helping Emily with her science fair project, turning part of his office into an improvised laboratory. They bought books on marine biology, downloaded specialized documentaries, and even managed to get in touch with researchers from the Chicago Aquarium. "Uncle David, do you think one day I can study dolphins for real?" Emily asked one afternoon while they took notes on echolocation. "I'm sure you can, if that's what you want." "But Mum said studying those things is really expensive." David chose his words carefully. "There are many ways to get scholarships, special programs for talented students. When the time comes, we'll explore all the options together." It was then that the first proposal arrived that would change everything. Maria received a call during work hours. Something unusual, as she always turned off her phone to maintain the privacy of her employers. David noticed her agitation when she asked to step away to take the call. "Hello? Yes, this is she." Maria's voice trembled slightly. "How did you get my number?" "Oh, Miss Smith referred me." David tried not to listen, but the conversation was happening just a few feet away on the balcony. He could tell from the pauses and muffled exclamations that it was something important. "Chicago, wow, 3 times the salary. But I would have to." "I understand. Can I give you an answer by the end of the week?" When Maria hung up, David pretended to be focused on his laptop, but his heart was racing. "Sorry for the interruption," she said, returning to the kitchen, but he could tell she was shaken. "Are you okay?" Maria hesitated for a long moment before answering. "A private school in Chicago. They need an educational coordinator for elementary education. Miss Smith, my former advisor from college, referred me." She spoke slowly, as if still processing. "The salary is 3 times what I earn here. Housing included, full health plan, and Emily's school would be free." David felt the world spin. "And are you thinking of accepting?" "I don't know. It's an incredible opportunity, the kind of job I've always dreamed of having." Maria stopped cleaning the counter and looked at him. "But it would mean leaving New York, starting over somewhere else." "And leaving your job here," David completed, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. David struggled against the impulse to offer anything to make her stay. A raise, extra benefits, whatever it took, but something in the dignity of how she had presented the situation prevented him from turning it into a financial transaction. "It's a great opportunity," he finally said, and the words came out like blades in his own throat. "It is," Maria agreed, but there was a sadness in her voice that echoed his. That night, David couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty apartment, imagining what it would be like to return to the old routine. Absolute silence, solitary meals, no. Child laughter to break the monotony, financial reports. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to admit a terrible truth. He was in love. Not just with Maria, although he admired her more each day, but with the entire dynamic they had brought into his life. He was in love with the idea of family, of belonging, of a purpose beyond quarterly profits. And now all of that could disappear because of a phone call. The next morning, Maria arrived earlier than usual. David was having coffee on the balcony when she appeared, carrying a determined expression he had learned to recognize. "Mr. David, I need to ask you a direct question." "Sure." "Why do you care so much about us?" The question came without preamble, as direct as a bullet. Since Christmas, your attitude has completely changed. You get involved in Emily's life, ask about me, act like we matter to you." David felt the air leave his lungs. It was the moment of truth he had been avoiding for weeks. "Because you both do," he said simply. "But why? We're just your janitor and her daughter. That's not normal. It doesn't make sense." "It does. To me." David stood up, walking to the balcony railing. The city stretched out below, millions of people living their lives, but he could only think of the two who were changing his. "Maria, I spent 45 years building a perfect fortress around myself. Money, success, total control over every aspect of my life, and I was dying of loneliness without even realizing it." He turned to face her. "You two reminded me of what it means to be alive, of what truly matters. And now you want us to stay because of that?" "No," David replied with an honesty that surprised him. "I want you to be happy. If Chicago is where you will be happy, then you should go." Maria studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher something in his expression. "And what if I say we no longer know what would make us happy?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to fully explore. The end of March brought the first rains of autumn and a palpable tension that hung over the apartment like a heavy cloud. Maria had asked for a few more days to decide about Chicago, and David respected her silence, but they both knew that the decision was creating an invisible barrier between them. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything changed. David was on a video call with Japanese investors when he heard Maria answer the phone in the kitchen. He initially tried to ignore it, focusing on the presentation about international expansion, but her increasingly worried tone distracted him. "What do you mean, high fever? Since when?" Maria's voice sounded tense. "Okay, I'll pick her up right now. No, you don't need to call an ambulance. I'll take her straight to the hospital." David quickly excused himself from the investors and ended the call. He found Maria grabbing her bag, visibly nervous. "Emily has a high fever at school. She complained of chest pain during gym class and fainted." Maria's hands trembled as she searched for her keys. "I need to go get her." "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to, Mr. David. You have work." "Maria," David interrupted firmly, "I'm going with you." The drive to the school was tense. Maria nervously bit her nails while David navigated through the heavy traffic of the West Side. When they arrived, they found Emily in the nurse's office, pale and breathing heavily. "Mommy!" The weak little voice broke both their hearts. "I'm here, my love. How are you feeling?" Maria held her daughter's warm little hand, struggling to stay calm. "It hurts to breathe," Emily whispered, her little eyes searching for David over her mother's shoulder. "Uncle David came too?" "I did, sweetheart. We're going to take care of you." The school nurse, an experienced lady named Ms. Roberts, pulled Maria and David into the hallway. "She has had a fever of 102 degrees for 2 hours. We managed to bring it down a bit with acetaminophen, but her breathing is difficult and she complains of chest pain." Ms. Roberts spoke with the authority of someone who had seen many emergencies. "I recommend you take her straight to St. Luke's Hospital. It could be pneumonia." At the hospital, the next few hours turned into a blur of white corridors, tests, and agonizing waiting. Emily was admitted with suspected bacterial pneumonia, and the doctors explained that she would need intravenous antibiotics for at least 5 days. "Does the health plan cover everything?" David discreetly asked Maria while they waited. "In the hallway. It covers the basics, but if she needs ICU or more expensive tests," Maria ran her hands over her face, exhausted, "I'll have to see what I can do." David watched the woman he admired more and more struggle against tears of worry and wounded pride. He knew she was on a tight budget, that any medical emergency could compromise the family finances for months. "Maria, let me help with the costs." No. The response came quick and definitive. Please, just... No, Mr. David. Maria looked at him with a firmness he already knew well. Thank you for the offer, but I can't accept it. It's already too much for you to be here, having dropped everything to be with us. David wanted to argue, but he recognized in her gaze the same unshakable dignity that made her work double shifts to pay off her husband's debts without accepting favors from anyone. The first night in the hospital was terrible. Emily coughed constantly, and her fever fluctuated despite the medication. Maria didn't leave her daughter's side, holding her little hand and softly humming the song she used to sing to calm her at home. David brought coffee and sandwiches which Maria barely touched. He himself couldn't eat, watching the girl who had become so important in his life fight against the illness attacking her small lungs. You should go home and rest, Maria said around midnight when Emily finally managed to fall asleep. I'm not going anywhere, David replied, adjusting himself in the uncomfortable chair. In the hospital room, Mr. Anderson said, Maria, stop trying to convince me to leave. I'm not abandoning you. It was on the second night that the situation became complicated. Emily woke up struggling to breathe, and her oxygen levels plummeted. The medical team quickly mobilized, and for a moment they considered transferring her to the ICU. Is this normal with pneumonia? David asked Dr. Smith, the pediatric pulmonologist, while Maria stayed with Emily. It can happen. Children her age sometimes have complications because their respiratory systems are still developing. The doctor, a kind-looking man in his 50s, was direct. The antibiotic is working, but slowly. If there isn't significant improvement in the next 12 hours, we will need to consider other treatments. Other treatments like ICU, assisted ventilation, stronger antibiotics. It's protocol when the initial treatment isn't effective. David felt his blood run cold. And the costs? Look, I'll be frank with you. If she needs the ICU, we're talking about high costs. Her insurance covers part of it, but... Dr. Smith shrugged. I know you are a working family. If it comes to that, we can talk to the hospital's social services. When David returned to the room, he found Maria silently crying beside Emily's bed, who was sleeping with the help of an oxygen concentrator. She will be okay, he said, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. And if she isn't? Maria lifted her tear-stained face. What if... I can't afford the treatment she needs. What if... Stop! David knelt beside her chair. Listen to me. No matter what happens, no matter how much it costs, Emily will receive the best treatment available. That's non-negotiable. Mr. Anderson, I've already said I can't accept. I'm not asking for your permission, David said with a determination that surprised them both. I'm informing you. If necessary, I will pay. If you want, you can pay me back later, in installments, however you prefer. But Emily will not go without treatment because of money. Maria stared at him for a long moment, and David saw the exact moment her defenses crumbled, not out of gratitude or relief, but because she finally understood that he wasn't doing this out of obligation or charity. He was doing it because they were his family, even if none of them had the courage to verbalize that yet. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Because I love you both, David replied with a simplicity that cut through all her defenses. I love Emily as if she were my daughter. And I love you in a way I didn't even know existed. The silence that followed was broken only by the rhythmic sound of the oxygen concentrator and Emily's more regular breathing, which seemed to be finally responding to the treatment. David, Maria began, but he raised his hand. You don't need to say anything now. I just wanted you to know. On the morning of the third day, Emily woke up asking for water and complaining that she was hungry, the first real sign of improvement since her admission. Dr. Smith smiled as he examined her and confirmed that the pneumonia was responding to treatment. 2 more days of antibiotics, and you can take our patient home, he announced, eliciting the first genuine smile from Maria in 72 hours. Uncle David, Emily called with her still hoarse voice, did you stay here the whole time? I did. Why? David looked at Maria, who was watching the conversation, with an expression he couldn't fully decipher. Because that's what family does, little one. We take care of each other. Emily nodded, as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. So we are really family? I think so, David replied, feeling his chest warm. That afternoon, while Emily slept peacefully, Maria and David had the conversation that had been postponed for weeks. About Chicago, she began. Have you decided? I've decided that I'm going to call them today and decline the offer. David felt his heart race, but he forced himself to keep his voice calm. Are you sure? It's an incredible opportunity. It is, but I've realized that I'm already where I want to be. Maria looked him directly in the eye. The question is, are you sure about what you're feeling? Because this will change everything between us. I'm absolutely sure, David replied without hesitation. You and Emily are the best thing that has ever happened to me. If you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that. Maria smiled, the first truly happy smile he had seen since the crisis began. Then let's try to build something together, but slowly, our way, no rush. Our way, David agreed, holding her hand for the first time. When Emily woke up hours later and saw them holding hands, she simply sighed contentedly, as if she had anticipated it for a long time. Finally, she murmured, closing her eyes again. Now we are a real family. April arrived with its golden afternoons and the feeling that life had found a new rhythm. Emily fully recovered from pneumonia and returned to school more talkative than ever, telling anyone who would listen about how her father figure had taken care of her in the hospital. David and Maria were carefully navigating the early days of a relationship that was still defining itself, respecting the boundaries she had set about building something solid without haste. It was on a Friday that David decided to organize the home office to better accommodate Emily's study sessions. While going through old files he had brought from the company years before, he found a folder he hadn't seen in a long time. Projects, 90s. Curious, he opened the file and began to flip through construction contracts from when his company was still small and accepting basic infrastructure projects. It was then that a name made him stop completely. Johnson Edward Civil Engineer Project, South Barra Industrial Complex. David's heart raced. Smith, the same last name as Maria. With trembling hands, he searched for more details in the file. John Smith, 28 years old at the time, hired as a supervising engineer for the construction of an industrial complex in Manhattan. The project had been completed, but David vaguely remembered complications at the end of the construction. He picked up the phone and called Marcus, who still kept in touch with some former employees. Marcus, I need a favor. Do you remember a civil engineer named John Smith who worked with us in the 90s? John Smith. Marcus thought for a moment. Familiar name. Why? Just checking some old documents. Can you see if we have anything about him in the company files? Sure, but it will have to be Monday. Why? The rush? David changed the subject and hung up, but spent the entire weekend with that discovery hammering in his mind. Could it be a coincidence? Smith was a common last name, and Maria had never specifically mentioned what her late husband's profession was. On Monday, Marcus called with information that changed everything. David, I found what you wanted. John Smith worked with us from March to December 1995. Civil engineer, responsible for supervising the Manhattan Industrial Complex. Marcus's voice grew more serious. But there's something strange here. He had a workplace accident in November, a scaffolding fall that resulted in a spinal injury. He was sidelined and then, wow, there's a lawsuit here. What kind of lawsuit? Negligence regarding safety equipment. He claimed that the scaffolding was not up to code, that the company knew of the risks and did not take action. Marcus paused for a moment. David, this lawsuit was never resolved. John Smith died in 2023 and the case was left pending. David hung up the phone in shock. The pieces of the puzzle fit together disturbingly. Maria was the widow of a man who had been injured working for his company 2 decades earlier. Tapimwaibiya, man who had sued the company for negligence and died before seeing the case resolved. Did Maria know this? Was that why she had accepted a job working for him? Questions multiplied in his mind like viruses, contaminating every good memory from the past months. Was it all part of some plan? An elaborate way to get close to him, to secure a settlement? But then he remembered the way she looked at Emily, the genuine tenderness in her voice when she spoke about academic dreams, the way she had systematically refused any financial help. It didn't make sense that it was manipulation, or did it? That afternoon, when Maria arrived with Emily from school, David was visibly disturbed. He tried to act normally, but Maria knew him too well not to notice. "Did something happen?" she asked after Emily went to play in her room. "Maria," David began, choosing his words carefully, "I need to ask you a question about your husband." He saw something pass through her eyes, a flash of recognition or fear, he couldn't tell. What kind of question? What was his profession? Maria was very quiet for a long moment. "Why are you asking this now? Please, just answer." "John was a civil engineer." Her voice came out quieter than usual. "And did he work here in Manhattan, on construction sites?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maria sat heavily in a chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. "You found out," she said simply. "Found out what exactly?" David felt his voice come out harsher than he intended. "That my husband worked for your company, that he was injured on one of your sites, that he died without ever receiving the compensation he deserved. And did you know this when you started working here?" Maria looked up at him and David saw tears forming. "I found out on the first day. When I saw your name on the building's plaque, I went to research. I discovered the connection." "And still accepted the job?" "I did." Her voice became firm again. "I wanted to see what kind of man you were. I wanted to understand how someone who had destroyed my family could sleep at night." David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "So all of this was what? Revenge?" "It started as curiosity. Maybe revenge, yes." Maria stood up, looking him directly in the eye. "But do you want to know the truth? In 2 weeks working here, I realized that you probably didn't even know John existed, that to you, he was just another employee on a spreadsheet." "Maria, let me finish." She raised her hand. "I discovered that you were lonely, a workaholic, completely disconnected from anything that really mattered. And no matter how angry I felt, I couldn't bring myself to hate you. You were pathetic." The word cut deep, but David knew he deserved it. "And then?" he asked hoarsely. "Then you met my daughter, and I saw a different man emerge. I saw kindness, care, a capacity for love that you didn't even know you had." Maria wiped away the tears that were beginning to fall. "And I fell in love with that man. Not the cold businessman who neglected my husband's safety, but the man who plays house on the living room floor and stays up all night in the hospital." David remained silent, processing every word. "And the lawsuit?" "It's still open. John died before the resolution, but technically I could pursue it." Maria looked at him with a Courage he admired. But I won't do that. Why not? Because revenge won't bring John back, and because... She hesitated. Because I found something here that I don't want to destroy. That night, after Maria took Emily home, David stayed up very late, rereading the lawsuit documents. John Smith had indeed alerted about problems with the scaffolding 2 weeks before the accident. There were emails documenting his concerns, which had been filed away unanswered by the management at the time. David vaguely remembered the construction site. He was young, ambitious, completely focused on deadlines and profits. He had probably delegated safety issues to subordinates and never questioned whether they were being followed. John Smith had died due to negligence from his company, and David had never even known his name. The next morning, David called his lawyer. "Dr. Paul, I need you to open the lawsuit for John Smith. I want to resolve this." "But David, the lawsuit was on hold. There's no legal obligation." "I don't care about legal obligation. I care about moral obligation." When Maria arrived for work, she found David waiting in the room with an expression she couldn't decipher. "I spoke with my lawyer this morning," he said bluntly. Maria tensed up. "David, I will pay the full compensation that John should have received, with interest and inflation adjustment for 28 years. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I won't accept your money out of guilt." "It's not guilt, Maria. It's justice." "And what happens after?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "You pay your moral debt and feel at peace? And us? What are we after this? A resolved business transaction?" David realized there was a much deeper question behind her words. Could true love be built on a foundation of guilt and reparation? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can't pretend I didn't find out. John deserved justice, and his daughter deserves the future that this money can provide." Maria watched him for a long moment, and David saw in her the same internal struggle he felt. "And if I accept the money," she said slowly, "how will we know if our feelings are real or just convenient?" It was the question he feared the most, because he had no answer. "Maybe we'll have to figure that out together," he finally said. That afternoon, Emily came home from school excited to show a paper she had written about my family. In the paper, she described 3 people: my mom, who is the bravest person in the world, my dad in heaven, who protects me even from afar, and my father figure, who showed up when we needed him the most. Reading those words written in the careful handwriting of a 7-year-old, David and Maria understood that, regardless of how everything had started, something real had been born between them. But they also knew that the road ahead would be much more complicated than they imagined. May brought the first cold, winds of New York winter, and a tense atmosphere that hung over the apartment like thick fog. Since the discovery about John, David and Maria had been walking on eggshells, each conversation laden with unspoken subtext. Emily, with the keen intuition of children, sensed that something had changed between the adults. During breakfast, she watched Uncle David distractedly tapping on his laptop, while her mom organized the house in unusual silence. "Mom, why are you and Uncle David fighting?" The question came on a rainy Saturday, while Maria helped her daughter with a science project. "We're not fighting, sweetheart, just talking about adult things. But you talk without looking at each other, and Uncle David always looks like he ate sour guava." David, who was working at the nearby table, couldn't help but smile sadly. Even amid the crisis, Emily managed to draw moments of lightness from him. "Come here, little one," he called, closing the laptop. "How about we make a cake? Your mom loves carrot cake." It was an attempt at normalcy that worked partially. The 3 spent the afternoon in the kitchen, Emily directing the operation like a little bossy chef, while David and Maria occasionally bumped into each other, creating moments of awkwardness that the girl seemed determined to ignore. "Now you both have to lick the bowl together," Emily announced authoritatively, "because it's a family tradition." David and Maria looked at each other for the first time in days, and for a moment the tension eased. "Since when is there this tradition?" Maria asked, smiling for the first time that week. "Since now. I made it up." Emily crossed her arms, satisfied with her logic. "Every family needs its own traditions." That night, after Emily fell asleep, David and Maria finally had the conversation they had been postponing. "I can't live in this tension anymore," Maria said, sitting in the living room chair. "We need to decide what we're going to do." "About the compensation?" "About everything. The compensation, us, the future." She sighed deeply. "David, I love you. This wasn't what I was planning when I started working here. But it happened. I love the man you've become. I love how you care for Emily. I love how you make me feel important." David felt his chest warm, but he knew there was a but coming. "But I can't build my happiness on the tragedy of my first marriage. John deserves justice, yes, but I deserve to know if our feelings survive when they're not mixed with guilt and reparation." "And how do we find that out?" Maria took a deep breath before answering. "I think we need some time apart, for you to resolve John's situation without my pressure, and for me to understand if what I feel is real or just gratitude and convenience." The suggestion hit David like a slap. "How long?" "I don't know. Long enough that when we meet again, it's because we want to, not because we need to. And Emily, she will suffer. But I'd rather she suffer a little now than build a life based on a lie." David wanted to argue, but he knew Maria was right. They needed to find out if what they felt was true love or just a convenient mix of loneliness, gratitude, and circumstances. "When do you want me to leave?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll be the one to leave. I'll resign on Monday. I've already found another job at a cleaning company. It pays less, but..." She shrugged. "It's honest. Maria, you don't have to." "I do." She stood up, determined. "I need to know that I can support my daughter without relying on you, on historical reparations, or on confusing feelings." On Monday, Maria submitted her resignation letter. David formally accepted, but they both knew it was much more than just a job change. It was the end of a phase in their lives. Emily didn't fully understand the situation, but she realized she wouldn't be visiting the Manhattan apartment every day anymore. "Is Uncle David going to disappear too?" she asked with teary eyes. "No, my love. He's just going to take some time to take care of his life, and we will take care of ours. But are we still family?" Maria hesitated. "We are special friends, and special friends always meet again." The following weeks were the hardest of David's life. He returned to his previous routine, a quiet apartment, solitary meals, total focus on work. But now he knew exactly what he was missing. Every room in the apartment echoed with memories. The living room where they built cardboard cities, the kitchen where Emily taught imaginary recipes, the balcony where they did their homework. But he fulfilled his part of the agreement. He contacted Dr. Smith and instructed that Eduardo's compensation be calculated and deposited into an account in Emily's name, with Maria as the legal guardian. The final amount was significant, almost $500,000, including interest and adjustments. When Dr. Smith called to confirm the deposit, David felt a mix of relief and emptiness. The debt was paid, but that didn't lessen the longing. Maria, in turn, was struggling with her own demons. The new job was physically exhausting and paid a third of what she earned with David. She came home, exhausted, but forced herself to maintain the routine with Emily: dinner, homework, bedtime story. "Mum, can I call Uncle David?" Emily asked one night, after 2 weeks apart. "Why do you want to call him?" Because I learned something new about octopuses at school, and I want to tell him, and because I miss him." Maria felt her heart tighten. She missed him too, more than she thought possible. "You can call, but just to tell him about the octopuses, okay?" The call lasted 15 minutes. Emily excitedly talked about cephalopods and their camouflage abilities, while David listened to every word as if it were music. Deep down, both adults knew that this conversation was a test. Would it be possible to maintain some kind of relationship without complicating things? When Emily said goodbye, David hesitantly asked, "How is your mum?" "Sad. She thinks I don't see, but she cries in the shower sometimes." The information broke David's heart. "And you? How are you feeling?" "Confused. Adults are very complicated, Uncle David. Why can't you just like each other and that's it?" "Because sometimes liking isn't enough, little one. Sometimes we need to make sure we are making the right choices. But how are you going to be sure if you stay away from each other?" It was a simple question, made with childlike logic, but it struck David like a bolt of clarity. That very night he called Maria. "Hi," her voice sounded cautious. "Hi, Emily asked me a question today that I can't get out of my head." "What question?" "How will we know if our feelings are real if we stay away from each other?" Maria was silent for a long moment. "And what was your answer?" "I didn't have one, but I thought maybe we should try a different path." "What kind of path?" David took a deep breath before continuing. "How about we start from scratch? Go out for dinner, talk, get to know each other without the pressure of boss and employee, without the guilt of the past. See if there's something real between us when we remove all the complications. Like a date? Like several dates if you want." Maria took a while to respond, and David almost hung up, thinking she had declined. "Saturday," she finally said. 7 o'clock, but I choose the place." "Deal." "And David?" "Yes?" "No. Expensive places. I want to see if you can have fun at a neighborhood steakhouse." David smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "I accept the challenge." When he hung up, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Maybe Emily was right. Perhaps the only way to discover the truth was to stop running from it. Saturday arrived with a clear sky and the promise of mild temperatures typical of New York winters. David spent more time getting ready than he did for important meetings. He changed clothes 3 times, trying to find the balance between casual and polished. He finally opted for dark jeans, a dress shirt without a tie, and a light blazer. He wanted to look like someone who cared, but not the formal businessman that Maria knew. The steakhouse she chose was in Queens, far from the downtown area where he usually frequented. Steakhouse of the Cowboy, a family establishment with formica tables, cold beer, and all-you-can-eat prices. David parked the Toyota Camry between a Honda Civic and a van, feeling completely out of his element but strangely excited about the experience. Maria arrived promptly at 7, wearing a simple navy blue dress that highlighted her brown eyes and light makeup that made her look younger. David stood up when he saw her enter, and for a moment they stood there, observing each other as if it were the first time. "Hi," she said, a bit awkwardly. "Hi, you look beautiful." "Thank you." Maria looked around the restaurant, which was starting to fill with noisy families and groups of friends. "Different from your usual places?" "Completely, and I'm loving it." The conversation started hesitantly, without the dynamic of boss and employee, without Emily as a natural bridge between them. They needed to figure out who they were to each other. David asked about her childhood, discovering that she had grown up in Brooklyn, the daughter of a mechanic and a seamstress, and had always been passionate about books. "My mum used to say I was born reading," Maria shared, relaxing as the night went on. I read everything I could find, product packaging, old newspapers, the neighbors' magazines. When I discovered the public library, it was like finding treasure. And how did you meet Eduardo? The question came, naturally, without the tension she had carried weeks before. Maria smiled wistfully. In college. He was studying engineering, I was studying literature, but we had a common elective, art history. He sat in the front, I in the back, and one day we started talking about an exhibition at MoMA. David listened attentively as she recounted her first marriage, how John was a dreamer, wanting to build bridges and buildings that would make a difference in the world, how they had planned to have several children and travel all over the country. He would have liked you, she said suddenly, surprising them both. You think? I'm sure. John admired determined people who turned dreams into reality. You two would have had intense discussions about sustainability and civil engineering, but you would have respected each other. Her frankness touched David deeply. I'm sorry I never met him, and I'm sorry for what my company did. I know, and I've already forgiven you for that. Maria held his hand across the table. But thank you for saying that. As the night went on, they discovered affinities they hadn't noticed before. They both enjoyed classic movies, hated crowds, and loved the rain. David shared about his lonely childhood, an only child of workaholic parents who left him in the care of nannies while they built their own business empire. I always thought money would solve everything, he admitted. My parents fought less when business was good. So I associated financial success with family happiness. It took me decades to realize they simply didn't like each other. Money just masked that. And that's why you never got married. Fear, mainly. Fear of repeating their pattern. Fear of not knowing how to be a good husband. Fear of... David hesitated. Not being enough for someone. Maria squeezed his hand. You are. More than enough, David. It's just a matter of finding the right person. They left the steakhouse just before midnight, after talking about everything, from life philosophies to favorite TV shows. David insisted on driving Maria home, slowly navigating the streets of Queens that she indicated. It's there, she pointed to a simple but well-kept housing complex. Apartment 304. David parked and watched the building. 3 stories, peeling paint in some spots, a small playground in the central yard, where a few children still played under the streetlights. Want to come up and see? Maria asked. And David realized it was a significant invitation. The apartment was small but cozy, 2 bedrooms, an open living room with a kitchenette, simple decor but full of personality. Photos of Emily at various ages covered an entire wall, mixed with Maria's diplomas and a few pictures from her wedding with John. Coffee, she offered, please. As Maria prepared the coffee, David observed the details that told the story of that family. Emily's drawings stuck on the fridge, stacks of children's books organized by height, a small shelf filled with classic and contemporary literature. Is Emily with your mum today? With my mother-in-law, actually. Ms. Roberts insists on spending 1 weekend a month with her granddaughter. She says it keeps John alive through Emily. They had coffee on the small balcony overlooking the yard, watching the nightlife of the housing complex. It was a world completely different from what David knew, but there was a vitality there, a sense of community that touched him. Maria, he eventually said, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Why did you agree to go out with me today? After everything that happened? She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Because I realized I was running away from something that could be important, and because, she smiled shyly, because I missed you. Not the boss, not the provider. I missed you as a person. I missed you too. Immensely. David, if we're going to try this again, it needs to be different. I'm not the damsel in distress who needs saving, and you're not the Prince Charming who will solve all my problems. I know. I'm an independent woman with responsibilities, my own opinions, and a daughter who comes first in my life. If you can't handle that, I can. And more. I admire that about you. Maria studied his face, as if trying to read his true intentions. And one more thing. No attempts to rescue me from my social condition. I'm not a charity project. If we're together, it's because we choose each other, not because you want to fix something. Understood. And about the compensation, it has already been deposited into an account for Emily. She is the legal beneficiary. You are the responsible one. It has nothing to do with me or you. It's her right. Maria nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. So, she said, getting up to collect the empty cups, shall we try again? Let's try again, David confirmed, and this time there was no doubt in his voice. When he stood up to leave, Maria walked him to the door. For a moment, they stood there, unsure of how to say goodbye. David? Yes? Next time, I'll choose an even more popular place. I want to see you at a midnight fair. David laughed. I accept any challenge you want to give me. Maria leaned in and gave him a soft kiss on the cheek, longer than a friendly greeting, less committed than a romantic kiss. Good night, she whispered. Good night. Driving back to Manhattan, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sensation that he was on the right path, not because of any strategic plan or cost-benefit analysis, but simply because his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. When he got home, the apartment didn't seem as empty as it had in recent weeks. For the first time since Maria and Emily had left his life, he could imagine a future where those hallways would echo with laughter again. The next morning, he woke up to a text message from Maria. Thank you for last night. Emily wants to know if... Can you call to tell me about the science fair project? Could it be this afternoon? David smiled as he replied, Of course, I'm eager to hear about the dolphins. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. June arrived with its chilly mornings and weak sunny afternoons, but the routine that David and Maria had built over the past weeks brought a sense of normalcy neither had experienced in a long time. They met twice a week, once just the two of them, and another time always with Emily, carefully creating a new dynamic that respected the boundaries set by Maria. It was on a Thursday that the first sign of trouble appeared. David was in a board meeting when his secretary knocked on the door with a worried expression. Mr. Anderson, there's a lady here who insists on speaking with you. She says it's about urgent personal matters. What kind of personal matters? David frowned. It was unusual for someone to get past reception without an appointment. She didn't want to give details. She just said she knows Maria and Emily. David's blood ran cold. He asked for a 5-minute break in the meeting and stepped out to the reception area, where he found a well-dressed woman in her 60s with a determined and slightly irritated expression. Mr. Anderson, I'm Miss Johnson, Maria's mother-in-law. I need to talk to you urgently. David led her to a private meeting room, trying to understand what John Smith's mother wanted with him. Ms. Johnson, how can I help you? Can you explain what the hell is happening with my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter? Her voice was firm, but David could sense the anxiety behind her controlled facade. Maria told me that you two are involved, that you are the same person who employed her and that... She paused, as if the words were hard to pronounce. That your company was responsible for my son's death. David took a deep breath. It was the conversation he knew he would eventually have to have, but he wasn't prepared for it to happen this way. Ms. Johnson, I understand your concern. You understand nothing, she exploded, losing her carefully maintained composure. "My son died due to negligence. He spent 2 years in a wheelchair, suffering, fighting for his rights in court, while people like you went on with their lives, as if nothing had happened." Her words hit David like punches. "You are right, and I have taken responsibility." "You took responsibility now, 28 years later, when it suits you." Miss Johnson leaned over the table. "And now you want my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter. You want to clear your conscience by buying my family. That's not it." "Then explain what it is, because from my point of view, you are taking advantage of Maria's financial need and Emily's innocence to feel better about yourself." David remained silent for a long moment, letting the accusation echo in the room. Part of him knew that Miss Johnson had reasons to be suspicious, but another part rebelled against the injustice of her words. "Miss Johnson, I can understand your anger. But how long have you known your daughter-in-law?" 15 years. "Then you know she's an intelligent, independent woman, capable of making her own decisions." David chose his words carefully. "I'm not buying anyone. I'm trying to build something genuine with an exceptional woman and her daughter. A woman you put in a position of financial dependency, a woman who chose to leave that position. She quit her job, found another one, and is creating her own independence." David leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, I love your daughter-in-law, and I love your granddaughter, not out of guilt, not out of charity, because they have made me a better man." Ms. Johnson studied him for a long moment, and David saw in her not just the protective mother-in-law, but a mother who had lost her son and feared losing the rest of her family. "My son was a good man," she finally said, her voice softer. "Hard-working, honest, a dreamer. He died fighting for justice." "I know, and I'm so sorry for your loss, more than I can express." Maria loved John with every fiber of her being. She took care of him in his last years when he could barely move. She never complained, never let on how much he was suffering. Miss Johnson wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "And now she smiles again. Emily talks about you as if you were a hero." David didn't know what to say. "That's why I'm here," she continued, "because I don't know if I should be happy. That they are happy or furious, that they are happy with the wrong man. And what do you want from me? I want your word that you won't hurt them, that when the novelty wears off, when the guilt diminishes, you won't just disappear." Ms. Johnson looked him straight in the eye. "Because if you do, I swear to God, I will destroy your reputation publicly. I will tell all the newspapers how the magnate David Anderson toyed with the feelings of the widow of your negligence's victim. The threat was real and David knew it, but looking at that woman determined to protect her family, he felt only respect. Miss Johnson, I can't guarantee the future because no one can. But I can give you my word that my intentions are honest, and that no matter what happens, I will always ensure that Maria and Emily have everything they need. I don't want you to take care of them. I want you to love them. I do love them." Ms. Johnson nodded slowly, as if she had made a decision. "Then I will give you a chance, but I will be watching." When she left, David was alone in the meeting room, processing the conversation. He knew that Ms. Johnson was right about many of her concerns. The dynamic between him, Maria, and Emily was complex, filled with nuances that could be misinterpreted. That night, David called Maria and told her about the meeting with her mother-in-law. "She came looking for you at the office?" Maria sounded shocked. "David, I'm so sorry. Ms. Roberts is protective, but that was too far." "It wasn't too far. She was defending her family. I admire that." "And what did you say to her?" "The truth, that I love both of you and that my intentions are serious." Maria was quiet for a moment. "David, I need to tell you something. Ms. Roberts wasn't the only one who knew about us." What do you mean? Your sister Marina called a mutual friend of ours, asking questions about me. Apparently, someone saw us together at the mall last week. David felt his stomach drop. His sister Marina had a sharp tongue and an extensive social network. If she had started asking questions, soon the entire New York elite would know the story. What exactly did she ask? About my profession, my financial situation, if I had hidden motives with you? Maria sighed. The friend told me because she thought it was strange for someone to investigate my life. Maria, I'm so sorry. I'll talk to Marina. You don't need to, but I think we should prepare for unpleasant comments. Wealthy people don't usually approve when one of their own gets involved with someone from a different class. That Friday, David went to lunch with Marcus, determined to test the waters before the rumors spread completely. Marcus, I need to tell you something. I'm dating. Great news. Who's the lucky one? Someone we know. It's Maria, my former housekeeper. Marcus almost choked on his wine. Sorry, repeat that? David told the whole story. Christmas, the development of their relationship, the discovery about John, the temporary separation, and the restart. Marcus listened without interrupting, but David could see the gears turning in his friend's head. Rafa, Marcus finally said, are you sure about what you're doing? Absolutely. Because, man, this is going to be a scandal. Billionaire executive with the housekeeper, the press is going to have a field day with this story. I don't care about the press. And the company board, the investors. This could affect the business. If it affects it, I'll deal with the consequences. Marcus shook his head, incredulous. I've never seen you like this. You really are in love. I am. And her? Are you sure she's not taking advantage of the situation? The question irritated David more than it should have. Marcus, you know the type of woman who usually seeks me out. Ambitious executives, bored heiresses, socialites looking for status. Maria is different. She quit her job to preserve our relationship, refused money several times, works twice as hard to maintain her independence. Okay, I'm just trying to protect you, and I appreciate that, but my decision is made. Over the weekend, David and Maria took Emily to Central Park. It was their first public outing together since resuming the relationship, and David was nervous about possible encounters with acquaintances. He was admiring a water lily with Emily when he heard a familiar voice behind him. David Anderson, what a surprise to see you here. He turned around and found Patricia Johnson, the wife of one of the biggest real estate moguls and a well-known gossip in New York high society. Hi, Patricia. How are you? Very well. And you? She looked curiously at Maria and Emily. Aren't you going to introduce me to your friends? David hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then decided he had nothing to hide. Of course. This is Maria and her daughter Emily. Maria, this is Patricia Johnson. Nice to meet you, Maria said politely, but David noticed the tension in her voice. Likewise, Patricia replied, but her eyes were analyzing every detail, from Maria's simple outfit to Emily's little backpack. And how did you all meet? We've been friends for some time, David replied diplomatically. How interesting. And you, dear, Patricia directed directly at Maria, what do you do? I provide services, Maria replied with dignity, but David saw the discomfort in her eyes. After a few more minutes of superficial conversation, Patricia said goodbye, but David knew that by the end of the day, the story would be circulating in all the WhatsApp groups of the New York elite. I'm sorry about that, he said to Maria when they were alone. You don't need to apologize, but I think we should talk about what will happen when this becomes public. That night, after Emily fell asleep, they had a difficult conversation about the social consequences of their relationship. "David, I don't care what people think about me, but I care about what they think about Emily," Maria said. "I don't want her to be bullied at school because her mom is dating a famous businessman. We'll protect her." "How?" "Putting her in a bubble, changing schools. That's not a normal life, David." "So, what do you want to do?" Maria sighed deeply. "I want you to be absolutely sure that we're worth it, because once this becomes public, there's no turning back for either of us." David held her hands and looked directly into her eyes. "Maria, I'm sure. You two are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I don't care what they say, I don't care what doors close. I only care about being with you." "Even if it affects your business?" "Even if it affects everything." Maria smiled for the first time that night. "Then, let's face the storm together." The following Monday, David woke up to a call from Marcus. "Rafa, I need to warn you. A note came out in the social column of the newspaper about you and Maria." David's heart raced. "What does it say?" "Businessman David Anderson was seen at Central Park last Sunday, accompanied by a mysterious brunette and her daughter. Has the most sought-after bachelor in the city finally found love?" "Is that all?" "For now, but we know how it works. When they find out who she is, they will find out. And when they do, we'll be ready." David hung up the phone and prepared for what he knew was coming next. The first real test of the solidity of what they had built together. July arrived with its characteristic cold and a media storm that neither of them was fully prepared to face. The discreet note in the social column. It had only been the beginning. Within days, investigative journalists uncovered Maria's identity, and the full story came to light with devastating force. "Tech magnate dates victim's widow from his own company" was the headline splashed across the front page of New York's most popular newspaper on a chilly Tuesday. The article was accompanied by photos of the three in Central Park and a detailed history of John's accident, the suspended lawsuit, and the current relationship between David and Maria. David was at the office when Marcus walked in with the newspaper in hand and a grim expression. "Man, this is bad, really bad." The article was extensive and, while technically factual, was laden with insinuations. It suggested that David had taken advantage of Maria's vulnerable situation, that the relationship was a way to silence potential lawsuits, and that there was something suspicious about the coincidence of him getting involved with the widow of a victim of his company. "Since when do you know her identity?" a journalist asked in an ambush at the exit of the corporate building. "Did your relationship start when she was still your employee? Is it true that you paid $1 million settlement to win her over?" David did not answer any questions, but knew that silence would be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Maria, for her part, was living a nightmare. She arrived at work to find colleagues whispering and looking at her with a mix of curiosity and envy. The boss called her into a private room. "Maria, you understand our position, right? The company cannot be involved in scandals." "What scandal, Miss Johnson?" "I'm dating someone. Someone who is being investigated for using you to cover up corporate negligence. This reflects poorly on our corporate image. This is ridiculous. There's nothing being investigated. Even so, I think it's best if you take a few days off until this blows over." Maria left work humiliated and furious. On her way home, she stopped at a newsstand and bought all the publications that were talking about the case. Each article was worse than the last, portraying her as either an opportunist or a pathetic victim. When she arrived at the apartment, she found Emily watching cartoons in the living room, oblivious to the storm brewing around the family. "Hi, Mom," Aunt Carmen called. "She said she saw you on TV." Maria's heart sank. If the story had reached the TV news, the exposure was complete. That afternoon, David tried to call Maria several times, but she did not answer. He finally decided to go to her apartment, dodging the 3 news vans that had been following him since morning. He found her in the kitchen, surrounded by newspapers spread across the table, with a desolate expression. "Maria, did you see?" She pointed to the headlines. "They're painting me as a gold digger or a manipulated victim. There isn't a single version where I'm seen as a woman capable of making my own decisions." "I know. I'm so sorry." "And Emily? How am I going to explain this to her?" This afternoon, the school principal called saying some parents were worried about the exposure. Maria ran her hands through her hair, frustrated. "A 7-year-old child, David. They're involving a child in this." David sat down next to her, trying to find comforting words that sounded genuine. "We'll hire a public relations firm. We'll control the narrative." Control the narrative. Maria looked at him with an expression he didn't recognize. "David, do you think this is about narrative? This is about our lives, our privacy, my daughter's future." "I know, but—" "You know? Really? Because you have enough money to isolate yourself from any consequences. I don't. I lost my job today. Emily's school is questioning our presence, and my own mother-in-law called asking if it's true that I'm selling Eduardo's memory." The words hit David like bullets. "Maria, let's leave the country for a while. Let this cool down. Run away? Not run away. Protect ourselves. You two deserve peace." Maria stood up abruptly. "And then? When do we come back?" "If we come back, David, this is my life, my city, my community. I can't just disappear because some journalist decided to turn our story into entertainment." That night, David couldn't sleep. He walked around the apartment, trying to find a solution that would protect the people he loved without destroying what they had built together. At 3 in the morning, he made a decision. The next morning, he called a press conference. The room at the Plaza Hotel was packed with journalists, cameras, and onlookers. David entered wearing his best suit, but with a more vulnerable expression than he had ever shown publicly. "Good morning. I called this press conference because some incorrect information is circulating about my personal life and affecting people who do not deserve to be exposed in this way." The flashes went off frantically. "First, I want to clarify the facts about the accident of engineer John Smith in 1995. Yes, my company was responsible for the negligence that resulted in his injury and subsequent death. Yes, I took full responsibility for that and paid a full settlement to the family, not as a way to buy anyone, but because it was the right thing to do." A murmur spread through the room. "Second, about my relationship with Maria Johnson. I met her as an exemplary professional who worked in my home for 6 years. Our relationship evolved naturally over time, based on mutual respect and genuine affection for her and her daughter Emily." "Mr. Anderson," shouted a journalist, "don't you find it problematic to be involved with the widow of a victim of your company?" "I find it problematic that the press turns a love story into a scandal. Maria Johnson is an intelligent, independent woman, a graduate in literature, who works tirelessly to raise her daughter with dignity. Reducing her to a gold-digging widow is disrespectful and factually incorrect." "How do you respond to the accusations that you are taking advantage of her vulnerable situation?" "Maria Johnson resigned from my employment specifically to preserve our relationship. She found independent work and built her own autonomy. If anyone is being exploited, in this story it's about them. A media that insists on portraying working women as victims incapable of their own choices." David took a deep breath before the hardest part. "Lastly, I want to make it clear that I love Maria and Emily deeply. I intend to marry Maria, legally adopt Emily, and build a family based on the values that truly matter: love, respect, and mutual commitment. The room erupted in simultaneous questions, but David raised his hand. I will not answer any more questions. I only ask that you respect the privacy of a 7-year-old child who did not choose to be at the center of this attention. Thank you. David left the press conference straight to Maria's apartment, where he found her watching reruns of the interview on television with Emily in her lap. You said you want to marry me, Maria said without taking her eyes off the TV. I did. In front of the whole country. I did. Without consulting me. It was a bit impulsive, David admitted, feeling his heart race. But it was true. Maria finally looked at him, and David saw tears in her eyes. Uncle David is going to be my real dad? Emily asked, looking between the two adults. If your mom agrees, David replied, kneeling to the girl's height, and if you want me to be your dad. I want to, Emily shouted, jumping off the couch straight into his arms. David looked at Maria over the top of his daughter's head, waiting for the answer that would change everything. David Anderson, Maria said with a smile mixed with tears, you just proposed to me on national television without even giving me a real kiss yet. Can I fix at least one of those things now? You can. The kiss happened with Emily between them, laughing and making comments about how adults are weird, while the reporters on TV analyzed every word from the press conference that had just changed. 3 lives forever. Outside, some photographers were still trying to capture images through the apartment windows, but inside that small and cozy room, David, Maria, and Emily finally knew they had found something that no media storm could destroy. A true family built on love and conscious choice. And now? Maria asked, still in his arms. Now we plan a wedding, David replied, and we start our real life. December returned to New York with its familiar warmth and the promise of a summer that would bring definitive changes. The apartment in Manhattan was unrecognizable, walls that once displayed. Cold, contemporary art now showcased colorful drawings by Emily lovingly framed. The library, organized alphabetically, coexisted with stacks of children's books, and minimalist furniture shared space with educational toys and ongoing science projects. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the night that had changed everything. David watched Maria in the kitchen, no longer as a worker, but as a homemaker preparing dinner for the family they had built together. She wore the apron he had bought for her, an elegant model she had personally chosen, rejecting his attempts to gift her with things that were too expensive. Uncle David? I mean Dad David, Emily corrected herself, running into the living room with a poorly wrapped gift in her hands. At 8 years old, she had grown, become smarter, and had perfectly adapted to the new family reality. Can I open my present now? It's not midnight yet, little one, David said, but accepted the package with a warmed heart. Even after months, he still felt emotional every time Emily called him Dad. But this is special. I made it at school with the help of the new teacher. David carefully unwrapped the gift and found a handmade picture frame decorated with seashells and glitter, containing a photo of the 3 of them at the beach taken 2 weeks earlier. Beneath the photo, Emily had glued a phrase written in her neat handwriting, "My heart family, Dad David, Mom Maria, and me." It's the most beautiful thing I've ever received in my life, David said, hugging the girl as he felt his eyes welling up. The last few months had not been easy. The media exposure had gradually diminished, but left scars. Maria had struggled to find work. Many employers recognized her and preferred to avoid complications. It was David who suggested she return to school and prepare for public service exams, offering to support the household while she studied. It's not charity, he had said when she hesitated to accept the proposal. It's an investment in our future. You've always wanted to be a real teacher. Now you have the chance. Maria had accepted, but maintaining her characteristic independence. She studied for state and municipal teaching exams, determined to earn a position on her own merit. In her spare time, she helped David with company projects, her background in education being valuable for corporate communication and reports that required textual clarity. "Dinner is almost ready," Maria announced, taking off her apron and joining them in the living room. "And we have guests arriving soon." As if it were a prearranged signal, the doorbell rang. David opened the door to find Ms. Roberts, Maria's mother, carrying bags of gifts and a smile he had learned to appreciate over the past few months. "Good evening, David," she greeted him with genuine affection. "How is my favorite son-in-law?" "Favorite and only son-in-law," David laughed, helping her with the bags. His relationship with Ms. Roberts had evolved from distrust to acceptance, and eventually to something close to familial affection. "Grandma Roberts!" Emily ran to hug her grandmother. "Did you bring the secret dessert?" "I did. My granddaughter. Chocolate cake, just like your biological dad used to like." Miss Roberts looked at David as she spoke. "I thought it was important to keep some of the Santos family traditions." David nodded, touched by the delicacy with which she kept Eduardo's memory alive without excluding him from the new family configuration. In the early months after the wedding, there had been tension about how to preserve the memory of Maria's her first husband, but gradually they found a balance. Eduardo was remembered fondly. His photos remained in places of honor. I watched until here, and leave your opinion about this story, huh? And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen for you. It's very exciting.